The blood stained the floorboards black in the moonlight. Clara Whitmore pressed her trembling hands against the jagged arrow wound, watching crimson seep between her fingers like spilled wine. The Apache warrior lay motionless on the narrow, a bed in her tiny room above Murphy's saloon, his copper skin pale beneath the grime of battle, his breathing shallow as morning mist. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She shouldn't have brought him here. Every instinct screamed that this was madness, that harboring an enemy of the town would mean her death. But when she'd found him collapsed behind the saloon, clutching his side, something in his eyes had stopped her from walking away. Pain, yes, but also a fierce dignity that reminded her of her own stubborn refusal to break, no matter how many men tried to bend her to their will. The trouble had started 3 days ago when the cavalry rode through Tombstone Creek, their blue uniforms dusty from the trail, their faces hard with purpose. Captain Marcus Dalton, a man who wore his authority like armor, had addressed the gathered townspeople from the saloon steps. His words were crisp, military, final. The Apache raids have increased. They've taken livestock, burned homesteads, killed good Christian folk. We're forming a militia. Every able-bodied man will join. We ride out tomorrow to find their camp and end this threat once and for all. The crowd had erupted in cheers. Men who'd never held anything deadlier than a plow handle suddenly swaggered with borrowed courage. They spoke of glory, of making the savages pay, of claiming the reward money the government had placed on Apache's scalps. Clara had watched from her window above, bile rising in her throat. She knew these men. She served them whiskey every night, endured their wandering hands, their crude remarks about what a woman like her was good for. Miner Burke, who beat his wife when the drink took him. Merchant Caldwell, who cheated on his scales and his marriage with equal enthusiasm. Sheriff Coleman, who turned a blind eye to anything that didn't affect his re-election chances. These were not heroes going to war. These were cowards with guns, drunk on righteousness and bloodlust. The Apache warrior stirred beneath her touch, his eyes fluttering open. They were the color of obsidian, sharp and intelligent despite the fever burning through him. When he saw her face, he didn't flinch or reach for a weapon. He simply watched her with the wariness of a wolf caught in a trap, waiting to see if she meant harm. Clara had been in Tombstone Creek for 2 years, ever since the stagecoach robbery that had left her stranded and penniless. A woman alone with no family and no prospects had few choices in a frontier town. She could marry, which meant submitting to whatever man would have her. She could work as a seamstress or laundress for pennies. Or she could work in the saloon, where the money was better, but the price was measured in dignity and bruises. She'd chosen the saloon, not because she wanted to, but because it was the only choice that let her keep some measure of independence. She served drinks, not herself, despite what half the town believed. She endured the assumptions, the propositions, the casual violence of men who saw her as less than human because of where she worked and how she earned her bread. The warrior's lips moved, speaking words in a language she didn't understand. His voice was rough, parched, but the tone was not pleading. Even bleeding and helpless, he asked for nothing. Clara reached for the water pitcher on her washstand, dampening a cloth. "Easy," she whispered, lifting his head to let drops fall between his cracked lips. "You're safe here." Safe. The word felt like a lie in her mouth. Nothing about this was safe. If the townspeople discovered what she'd done, they would drag them both into the street. They would tie her to a post and flog her for consorting with savages. They would torture him for information about his tribe's location, then hang him from the tallest tree. But she couldn't have left him there to die. She'd seen too much death, too much casual cruelty. When she'd stepped out back to empty the slop bucket and found him fallen against the woodpile, she'd acted on instinct, or perhaps on something deeper, perhaps on the recognition that they were both outcasts, both despised by the respectable folk of this town. She'd half-dragged, half-carried him up the back stairs to her room, praying no one would see. Lucky. For her, it was late, and most of the customers were too drunk to notice much beyond the bottom of their glasses. She'd locked her door, pulled the curtains tight, and done what she could to clean his wounds. The arrow had gone through his left side, missing vital organs by inches. A few more steps, and he would have collapsed where the town could see him. A few minutes earlier, and Burke's patrol might have found him first. Clara shuddered to think what they would have done. Burke collected Apache scalps like trophies, claiming $50 from the army for each one. He wore them on his belt, tanning them like leather, showing them off in the saloon like some grotesque badge of honor. Now, cleaning the warriors, wounds by candlelight, Clara found herself studying his features. He was young, perhaps her own age of 24. His hair was long and black, braided with what looked like beads carved from bone. Around his neck hung a leather cord with a small pouch she didn't dare touch. Sacred things, probably. Things white men would steal or destroy without thought. There were scars on his arms and chest, not random marks, but deliberate patterns. Ritual scars, she realized. Signs of manhood, trials passed, honors earned. This was not some savage raider as the townspeople imagined. This was a warrior with history, with culture, with meaning beyond their narrow understanding. The night stretched long and tense. Every sound from below made her heart race. Footsteps on the stairs, laughter from the saloon, the creak of settling. Wood. She sat beside the bed, cleaning and rebandaging his wounds, giving him water when he stirred. Twice he spoke in his own language, words soft and rhythmic like prayer. Once he said something that sounded like a name. Summer Rain. Or perhaps it was just the fever talking. When dawn light crept through the gaps in her curtains, Clara realized she hadn't slept at all. The warrior's breathing had steadied, his fever had broken, but he remained unconscious. She prepared for the day ahead, knowing she had to work downstairs as if nothing had changed. She had to serve breakfast to the men who had spent yesterday planning Apache deaths. She had to smile and nod while they bragged about the coming battle. Murphy, the saloon owner, was a rotund Irishman who'd come west during the gold rush and stayed when the veins ran dry. He was not unkind, but he was practical above all. He knew Clara's value as the only woman in his establishment who could read and count, who kept the books straight and the customers from stealing him blind. But he also knew his reputation and profits depended on maintaining the goodwill of the town's more prominent citizens. That morning, as Clara served coffee and eggs to the gathered militia, she listened to their plans with growing dread. Captain Dalton had sent out scouts. They'd found tracks leading northwest toward the mesas where the Apache were rumored to camp. The militia would ride out at midday, 60 men strong, armed with rifles and righteous fury. "We'll catch them in their holes," Burke declared, cutting his ham with violent strokes. "Show them what happens when they mess with American citizens. Take scalps like they take ours," added Caldwell, speaking around a mouthful of beans. "Eye for an eye, Bible says." Clara's hands shook as she poured coffee. She thought of the unconscious man upstairs, of the careful braiding in his hair, of the way he'd looked at her without fear, despite being completely at her mercy. These men spoke of him and his people like animals to be hunted, pelts to be claimed. Sheriff Coleman, a hollow-chested man who'd held his position through political connections rather than competence, leaned back in his chair. "Captain says, there's a $1,000 bonus for whoever brings in their war chief alive. Seems the army wants to make an example." The conversation continued, growing more bloodthirsty with each cup of coffee. Clara moved among them like a ghost, refilling. Cups, clearing plates, invisible in the way that serving women always were to powerful men. She heard them discuss tactics, routes, what they do with captured Apache women and children. Her stomach turned, but she kept her face neutral, her movements steady. By noon, the militia had assembled in the street. Wives and children gathered to see them off, some crying, others cheering. Clara watched from the saloon's front window as Captain Dalton mounted his black gelding and raised his saber. The sun caught the blade, sending flashes of light across the crowd. "We ride for civilization," he shouted. "We ride for our families. Our homes, our way of life. We'll return with victory or not at all." The crowd roared approval. The men spurred their horses, and the militia thundered out of town in a cloud of dust and bravado. Clara watched until they disappeared beyond the ridge, then climbed the stairs to check on her hidden patient. He was awake. The warrior sat up, against the wall, his obsidian eyes alert despite the pain that tightened his features. When Clara entered the room, he reached instinctively for a weapon that wasn't there. She held up her hands, showing them empty. "Peace," she said, though she doubted he understood English. "I won't hurt you." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He studied her face, her dress, the room around them. His gaze lingered on the window as if measuring distances, planning escape routes. When he spoke, his voice was rough but clear. "Why?" The word hit her like a stone. He did speak English. She sank into the chair beside the bed, suddenly feeling every hour of lost sleep. "Why what?" "Why help me? Your people try to kill mine." Clara considered the question. How could she explain the impulse that had made her drag a wounded enemy into her room? How could she tell him about the loneliness that had eaten at her for 2 years, about the way the townspeople looked at her like she was already damned, about the kinship she felt with anything the world deemed unworthy? "They're not my people," she said finally. "Not really." He tilted his head, waiting for more. "I work here. I serve them drink and food, but I'm not one of them. They think I'm..." She struggled for words that wouldn't sound like self-pity. "They think I'm fallen, unclean. A woman who works in a saloon is barely better than Apache to them." Something shifted in his expression. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. He understood being judged, being seen as less than human. "Your name?" he asked. Clara Whitmore." She paused. "What's yours?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Nightbear. My English name, the name the missionary at the fort gave me, is Samuel. I use both." "Nightbear," she repeated, tasting the strangeness of it. "How did you learn English so well?" "Trading post fort. Sometimes we need to speak your language to survive." His eyes grew distant. "I was educated at the mission school for 3 years as a boy. Part of the peace treaty. Learn white ways," they said. "Become civilized." There was bitter irony in his voice. Clara understood. Civilization meant conformity, meant abandoning everything that made you who you were to fit into someone else's idea of acceptability. Nightbear tried to sit up straighter and winced, pressing his hand to his bandaged side. Clara moved to help him, then stopped, unsure if her touch would be welcome. He'd allowed her to tend his wounds while unconscious, but now he was awake, alert, aware of the 1,000 taboos they were breaking. "The arrow?" he asked, looking down at his bandages. "Went clean through. Missed anything vital, far as I can tell. You'll live, but you need rest." He shook his head. "I cannot stay. When they find I am gone..." "They've already left. The militia rode out an hour ago. They're hunting for your camp." Nightbear's face went hard. "How many?" 60 men, maybe more." He closed his eyes, and Clara saw pain that had nothing to do with his wounds. "They will find nothing. My people move like the wind. But some of the young warriors, they will want to fight. Is that bad?" His laugh held no humor. 60 men with guns against warriors with bows and lances? It would be slaughter. If my people fight, they die. If they run—" He opened his eyes, looked directly at her. "They run forever." Clara felt the weight of that gaze, the burden of knowledge she couldn't unknow. This wasn't just about one wounded warrior anymore. This was about survival, about a way of life being hunted to extinction by men who saw genocide as progress. "Tell me about your people," she said quietly. Nightbear studied her for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether curiosity or genuine interest motivated the question. Finally, he spoke. "We are Chiricahua, the mountain people. We have lived in these lands since the world was young, since the spirits first breathed life into the stone and sage. We follow the seasons, the game, the water. We take what we need, no more. We honor the earth that gives us life." His voice carried the rhythm of storytelling, of oral tradition passed down through generations. Clara found herself leaning forward, drawn into words that painted a picture completely different from the savage raiders the townspeople imagined. "My grandfather was a great chief. He made peace with the Spanish, traded with them. When the white Americans came, we tried peace with them too. We signed papers, made promises. They gave us reservations, small pieces of our own land, and said we should be grateful." His expression darkened, but the papers meant nothing. The borders moved, the promises broke, and when we left the reservations to hunt, to find food, for our families, they called us renegades. Clara had heard the other side of this story countless times in the saloon. How the government had generously provided land for the savages, how they'd refused to be civilized, how they'd chosen war over peace. Hearing it from Nightbear's perspective cast everything in a different light. "The men who left today," she said slowly, "they think they're heroes, protecting their families. And we think the same when we defend ours." He leaned back against the wall, exhaustion creeping into his features. "Your people take our land, kill our game, poison our water with mines, then they wonder why we fight." They sat in silence, the weight of centuries of misunderstanding between them. Clara thought of the cheering crowd as the militia rode out, of the women waving handkerchiefs like it was some grand adventure. They had no idea they were celebrating the destruction of a way of life older than their grandparents' grandparents. "What will happen now?" she asked. "If your people can't fight, can't run?" Nightbear's jaw tightened. "We will be pushed onto smaller reservations. Our children will be taken to schools that teach them to hate who they are. Our language will be forbidden. Our ceremonies will be crimes. They will cut our hair, dress us in white man's clothes, give us white man's names, and tell us we should thank them for saving our souls." Clara's throat constricted. She thought of her own small rebellions, her refusal to marry the men who'd proposed, her insistence on keeping her own earnings despite social pressure to find a husband to manage them. But that was nothing compared to the systematic destruction Nightbear described. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and immediately felt the inadequacy of the words. "Do not apologize for things you did not do." His voice gentled slightly. "But also, do not think you understand. You are still white, still free to leave this place if you choose. My people cannot put on new clothes and become something else." She nodded, chastened but not offended. He was right. Whatever hardship she faced, as a woman alone, she had privileges his people would never enjoy. "Rest now," she said, standing to leave. "I'll bring you food when I can." "Clara." Her name sounded different in his voice, shaped by an accent she couldn't place. "You saved my life. That is a debt I cannot repay with words." "Don't think about debt. Just get better." She made her way back downstairs, where the saloon had filled with the women and old men left behind by the militia. They spoke in hushed, excited tones about the glory their menfolk would win, about the safety that would return to the territory once the Apache threat was ended. Martha Caldwell, the merchant's wife, noticed Clara descending and beckoned her. Over, a thin woman with pinched features and perpetually pursed lips, she was the self-appointed moral authority of Tombstone Creek. "Clara, dear, we're organizing a prayer circle for our brave men. Surely even someone in your position would want to pray for their safe return?" The words carried their usual edge. Clara had long ago grown used to Martha's particular brand of charitable condescension, the way she managed to insult and exclude while maintaining a veneer of Christian kindness. "Of course, Mrs. Caldwell, I'll pray for everyone's safe return." Martha's eyes narrowed slightly, as if detecting some hidden meaning in Clara's words. "Yes, well, I suppose we must pray for the conversion of the heathen as well. Though some souls are too lost for redemption." Clara bit back her response and simply nodded. As she moved away to serve other customers, she caught sight of herself in the mirror behind the bar. Brown hair pinned up, but already escaping its constraints. Tired green eyes that had seen too much. Dress that was clean but showed its age. Patched and resewn more times than she cared to count. A fallen woman in their eyes, unworthy of respect or consideration. She wondered what they would think if they knew she was hiding an Apache warrior in her room, tending his wounds, listening to his stories. They would see it as proof of her depravity, evidence that she'd finally sunk beyond all hope of redemption. But Clara felt more righteous in that moment than she had in months. The day passed slowly. Clara went through the motions of her work, serving meals, cleaning tables, listening to endless speculation about when the militia would return victorious. She climbed the stairs twice to check on Nightbear, bringing him water and what food she could sneak away without arousing suspicion. He was healing quickly, she noted. The fever had broken completely, and though he still moved carefully, his color was returning. Apache constitution, she supposed. A lifetime of hard living and natural remedies had given him resilience that soft town living would have sapped from a white man. That evening, as Clara was wiping down tables after the supper crowd, Murphy approached her with an expression she couldn't read. "Clara, lass, I need to speak with you." Her heart jumped, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, Mr. Murphy." He glanced around, ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. "I've been hearing talk about you being up in your room more than usual, about strange sounds." Clara's mouth went dry. "I've been tired, Mr. Murphy. The extra work with the men away." I'm sure that's it." He studied her face carefully. "But there's also been talk about someone seen going round the back of the building yesterday night. Someone who didn't come through the front door." Every muscle in Clara's body tensed for flight, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Probably just cats, Mr. Murphy. You know how they get into the garbage." Murphy nodded slowly, his blue eyes never leaving her face. "Cats, sure, that must be it." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Clara, I've known you for 2 years. You're a good worker, honest as the day is long. Whatever business you have up in that room is yours, but if that business brings trouble to my establishment, it won't, Mr. Murphy, I promise." He held her gaze for another long moment, then nodded. "See that it doesn't. And Clara, whatever you're doing, be careful. This town's got a long memory and a short temper for anything that doesn't fit their idea of proper." As Murphy walked away, Clara realized she'd been holding her breath. He knew, maybe not the details, but he knew she was hiding something. The question was what he would do about it. That night, as the saloon finally emptied and the last customer stumbled out into the dark street, Clara climbed the stairs with a heavy heart. She found Nightbear standing by the window, looking out at the town below through a gap in the curtains. "You should be resting," she said, though she didn't blame him for wanting to be on his feet. "I am thinking." "About what?" He turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression that hadn't been there before. A decision made, a path chosen. About why you risk everything for someone your people would kill without thought. Clara set down the tray of food she'd brought and considered his words. Maybe because I know what it's like to be judged for things beyond your control. Maybe because I'm tired of watching cruelty be called righteousness. And maybe because you see yourself in me, someone the world has decided is worthless. His words hit closer to the truth than she was comfortable admitting. Maybe. Nightbear moved closer, and Clara became acutely aware of how alone they were, how improper this entire situation would seem to anyone else. But she also realized she didn't care. In a world that had already condemned her, what was one more transgression? My people believe that when someone saves your life, their spirit becomes part of yours, he said quietly. You carry a piece of them forever. And you carry a piece of them? Yes, but also you become responsible for what they do with the life you saved. Their actions reflect on you. Clara felt the weight of that responsibility. Then I hope you'll do something worthwhile with it. I intend to. Nightbear moved to the bed, settling down with visible relief. Tell me about yourself, Clara. Whitmore, how does a woman like you end up in a place like this? Clara hesitated. Her story wasn't one she shared often, but something about the quiet intimacy of the moment, about the way he'd shared his own pain, made her want to speak. I came here with my husband 2 years ago. James Whitmore, a good man. Too good for this world. She sat in the chair, hands folded in her lap. We were traveling to California. James had dreams of starting a ranch, of building something clean and new. But the stagecoach was robbed outside town. James tried to protect me, and they shot him for it. Nightbear's expression softened with understanding. I was stranded here, with nothing but the clothes on my back and the wedding ring I sold for food. The respectable women of the town offered to help me find a husband, someone to take care of me. But I'd had love once. Real love. The idea of marrying some stranger for security, of being owned again. She trailed off, lost in memory. James had been gentle, funny, completely devoted to her. Their marriage had been brief, but genuine, built on affection and shared dreams rather than duty and financial necessity. So you chose independence over security, Nightbear said. It wasn't a question. I chose not to be owned. Working in the saloon isn't respectable, but it's honest work. I serve drinks, keep books, clean rooms. I don't. She paused, realizing she was defending herself to someone who hadn't accused her of anything. The white men who judge you do not deserve to touch your shadow, Nightbear said with quiet intensity. You have more honor than all of them combined. Clara looked at him in surprise. In 2 years, no one had spoken of her with such respect. Even Murphy, who treated her fairly, still made jokes about her virtue with the customers. But Nightbear spoke as if her honor was not only intact, but remarkable. Your husband was fortunate to have known you, he continued, even for a brief time. Tears pricked at Clara's eyes. She'd grieved James, yes, but no one had acknowledged what their relationship meant, how precious it had been. Everyone saw only her current status as a working woman without male protection. Thank you, she whispered. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Clara stirred herself to reality. You need to leave soon. The militia will return, and when they do, this town will be full of angry men looking for Apache to blame. I know. Tomorrow night when the moon is dark, I will go then. Where will you go? Nightbear smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. To find my people, to warn them, to prepare. Prepare for what? For whatever comes next. We cannot run forever. We cannot fight your guns with our arrows, but we can choose how our story ends. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. And how will it end? With dignity, with courage, on our own terms. He looked at her steadily. Some things matter more than survival, Clara Whitmore. Sometimes standing for what is right is worth any price. She understood, though the knowledge frightened her. Nightbear would return to his people not just with news of the militia's numbers and weapons, but with something far more dangerous. He would return with resolve. As Clara prepared to leave him for the night, Nightbear called to her softly. "Clara." "Yes." "If my people come for me, if warriors arrive looking for me, what will you do?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Clara knew what he was really asking. If Apache warriors came to town, would she betray him to save herself? Would she claim he'd forced her to help, that she'd been coerced? "I'll tell them you're not here," she said without hesitation, "that you left days ago." "And if they don't believe you?" Clara met his gaze steadily. "Then I suppose we'll face whatever comes together." Nightbear nodded once, slowly, as if filing away her answer for some future reference. "Sleep well, Clara Whitmore. Tomorrow brings change." As Clara descended to her own quarters, she wondered if she would sleep at all. Change was coming, that much was certain. The question was whether any of them would survive to see what grew from the ashes of the old ways. Outside, the wind picked, up carrying with it the scent of rain and distant smoke. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes howled their eternal songs of loneliness and endurance. And in a room above a frontier saloon, two outcasts from different worlds found something neither had expected to discover. Not love, not yet, but understanding. And sometimes, in a world gone mad with hatred, understanding was more precious than gold. Day was breaking when Clara finally drifted off to sleep, and her dreams were filled with visions of warriors painted for battle, of burning buildings, and of choices that could never be undone. She did not know that her dreams were prophecy. She did not know that in less than 24 hours, everything would change. The morning came too soon, bringing with it the thunder of approaching hooves. The riders emerged from dawn's mist. Like specters of war, 20 Apache warriors, faces painted in ochre and charcoal, approached Tombstone Creek with silent purpose. At their head rode a chief whose presence commanded both fear and respect. Clara stood frozen at her window as they entered the town. The returning militia, bloodied and defeated, had straggled in an hour earlier with tales of ambush and cunning. Now the Apache had come calling. The chief dismounted before the saloon, his eyes scanning the building with predatory focus. He wore a magnificent headdress of eagle feathers, and gold gleamed from bands around his arms. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of ancient bloodlines. "We seek our brother." Clara descended the stairs, her heart hammering. The saloon had emptied except for Murphy, who cowered behind the bar. She opened the front door and faced the chief directly. "He left 2 days ago," she lied smoothly, "headed west." The chief studied her with eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Behind him, warriors shifted restlessly on their horses, weapons ready. "You protected him when your people would have killed him," the chief said. It wasn't a question. Nightbear appeared then, descending the stairs despite his wounds. He spoke to the chief in rapid Apache, gesturing toward Clara. The exchange was brief, but intense. The chief nodded slowly, then reached into a leather pouch. He withdrew a necklace of pure gold and turquoise, ancient and beautiful beyond description. "For one who shows honor to those the world calls enemy," he said, placing it around Clara's neck, "you will always have the protection of the Chiricahua." The warriors wheeled their horses as one, dust swirling in their wake. Nightbear paused, Beside Clara, his hand briefly touching hers. "Some debts can only be repaid with a life freely given," he said. "You gave me mine back." They rode out as silently as they'd come, leaving Clara standing in the doorway wearing gold that marked her as friend to the Apache. The townspeople emerged slowly, staring in shock at the necklace, at her, at what had just transpired. "Sheriff," Coleman stepped forward, his face red with rage. "You harbored that savage. You betrayed your own kind." Clara touched the gold at her throat, feeling its weight and warmth. "No," she said clearly, "I found my kind." Martha Caldwell gasped, scandalized. "The church will hear of this. You'll be run out of town." "Good," Clara replied, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. "I was never meant for a place that calls cruelty righteousness." She turned and walked back into the saloon, leaving the crowd to whisper and rage behind her. Murphy looked at her with new eyes. "Where will you go, lass?" Clara smiled, touching the necklace again. "Somewhere I can be myself, without apology. Somewhere honor means more than appearance." That night, she packed her few belongings and left Tombstone Creek forever. Some said she went to live with the Apache. Others claimed she headed for California. But those who truly knew her understood the truth. Clara Whitmore had simply chosen to live free, protected by the respect of those who understood what real courage looked like. In a world that demanded she be small and silent, she had found her voice by speaking for those who had none. Sometimes the greatest revolutions begin with a single act of kindness. Sometimes protecting one life changes everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.